President Biden marked Holocaust Remembrance Day by condemning anti-Semitism in no uncertain terms. He called out the protests over the Israel-Hamas war that have taken over college campuses. Just hours before he spoke, Israel's military seized a key border crossing in southern Gaza, and there is still no ceasefire deal between Hamas to release the hostages from October 7th. For more, I want to bring in Ben Rhodes. He served as Deputy National Security Advisor for President Obama and is an MSNBC contributor. Ben, you have written presidential speeches. Did this one hit the right tone to bring down the temperature here at home? Can people even hear it at this point?
I think people can hear it. I mean, look, the president of the United States is the only person with a bully pulpit big enough to kind of break through and narrate events that have shaken the country. And in this instance, we've seen an alarming rise of anti-Semitism from all ends of the political spectrum, from the far right to the far left. And I think what people are looking for is reassurance that their core principles that their president stands for. And that's what he spoke to on an incredibly resonant day, obviously, with it being Holocaust Remembrance Day, in sending a message that whatever your views on this conflict, whatever your views between Israel and Palestine, that we're not going to tolerate the kind of anti-Semitism that we've seen rear its head in certain quarters of America. And I think that was a reassuring message to a lot of people.
NBC is reporting tonight that the White House halted a weapons shipment for Israel over concerns that they would be used in Rafah. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Rafah's loomed for months as a potential kind of breaking point between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden. You know, President Biden has called this a red line. I think the concerns out of the White House are that the civilian population in Rafah is enormous. There's over 1 million people there. Many of them have already been displaced once before. It's also the major aid crossing into Gaza. So when you're dealing with shortages of water and food, you cannot afford to lose the Rafah crossing, among others. And so I think the concern from the administration is if Israel goes forward with the kind of ground invasion and bombardment of Rafah that we've seen in other parts of Gaza, that it could really accelerate the humanitarian crisis. And so I think the suspension of the delivery of those offensive weapons, which included 2,000-pound bombs, is a bit of an indication of the administration's message privately to Prime Minister Netanyahu, which is that this is not the time and the way to go forward with this operation. There's a ceasefire negotiation to try to get some of the hostages out. And frankly, clearly, whatever assurances the Israeli government has tried to give the Biden administration about their plans to mitigate civilian deaths and civilian suffering in Rafah, those have clearly not, met the mark for the Biden administration. So if the Rafah invasion goes forward, I think we're probably looking at some kind of continuation of what has been a continued break between Biden and Netanyahu.
Let's talk about that ceasefire negotiation, because today the National Security Council said it believes Israel and Hamas will be able to close the gaps on those ceasefire talks. That's some indirect wording. What do you think they're actually saying? Are we close on getting a deal here?
I think they're trying to nudge both sides here. I mean, there's clearly some deal on the table that involves the release of around 33 Israeli hostages in exchange for a pretty significant number of Palestinian prisoners. I think the main sticking point, though, does kind of come back to Rafah, in the sense that the Israeli government is willing to agree to a kind of short-term ceasefire, a period of weeks. And what Hamas has insisted upon, and the terms that they agreed to, is a permanent cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire that holds for the long term. And that's really the most profound gap between the two sides. I think what the Biden administration is trying to do, and trying to find some middle ground, is to have a release of hostages, have a ceasefire for a period of time that can allow them to conduct some diplomacy, to see if there's something they can build upon, something that can get momentum here. So it feels to me like the two sides are pretty far apart. They're trying aggressively to close this window now, because if the Rafah invasion goes forward, they might lose the opportunity of having any kind of negotiated release of hostages in the coming weeks. So we're really at a critical juncture in this war, Stephanie, where if we don't get a ceasefire in the coming days and that Rafah operation goes forward, we're probably looking at a much longer war than what the administration wants.